Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are on the perennial border because, well, our garden is absolutely chock full of beautiful peonies right now, but all of them are in really inconvenient spots to film. But hey, our perennial border is looking beautiful right now. There is a peony right back there, dear sweet Paeonia pesce, which I've just been informed means to fish in French, which is something. That's something. But we've got a program for you today. We are going deeper in the garden, all about peonies. We've got our director, Mark Weathington, here, who's going to show us a whole bunch of beautiful peonies and tell us a little bit about some of the lesser known ones, and it should be a delightful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Mark to go deeper in the garden and tell us all about peonies.
Thank you very much. You know, I got to say that peonies are a relatively recent obsession of mine.
Oh yeah, is that right?
I mean, you know, I've always appreciated peonies. They're out there. They're workhorses. Here in the South, they can be in flower and gone pretty quickly, which at one point in my life I saw as a detriment. Now, I appreciate the fleeting nature of things. I like the being mindful, you know, going out and saying, hey, you know, isn't this incredible today?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I am seeing it right now at its peak. I really do appreciate that. I know not everybody does, but, you know, this spring in particular has been fantastic because we've had these, you know, bouts of cool weather, cool nights, and things in flower have lasted and lasted and lasted. So it's a really exciting time for them. Now, much of our peony collection at the Arboretum, we had some peonies here and there, but some years back, a local member of the Peony Society said, you should have peonies in your collection. And I said, hey, yeah, we should. What can you do? And she worked really hard as a member of the Peony Society to go through all different peony nurseries and get them to send us plants. And so we have quite a few planted around. And it's great because there are some of the peonies that are here that have finished, you know, weeks ago. And then a lot that are yet to open that have buds that are starting to show color or not showing any color at all. And so, you know, when you plant several of them, you do get this long succession of bloom. We grow very few. There are lots of different selections of peonies, but very few really truly different ones, different species in our gardens. There are, depending on your taxonomist, your how they break it down, there's maybe 37 species and another dozen or so varieties and subspecies. Sometimes you get as many as 40 species, as few as 30-some species, but mostly mid-30s is what people figure. And it's interesting kind of a spread of peonies. They go from kind of the Iberian Peninsula, you know, Spain and Portugal, Northwest Africa, all along Southern Europe, through the Caucasus and through all the stands, you know, as Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, you know, Croatia, and then all through almost all of Asia, you know, go up to the Gobi Desert, Japan, Korea. I think they kind of bypass India almost completely, but they are in like Pakistan, and so maybe they get into India as well a little bit. And then they're also in really restricted areas in the northwestern part of the United States of North America. Now, not when we think Pacific Northwest, they're not there. They're in the dry areas of the Northwest. You know, there's a whole other 2/3 of the state, you know, Washington, that's not wet and rainy, that's dry as can be. And you get up there and into Wyoming and Northern California and Washington, you get peony brownii. And then in Baja Peninsula, in very few locations, Peony californica. So northwestern U.S. and then northwestern Mexico. Those two make up a whole, there's 3 sections of peonies, and they make up a section called the Onipia section, which sounds weird, but it's kind of a, what do you call it, anagram of Paeonia, the genus. Those two, I'd love to be able to grow one of those, but if you live in an area where those grow naturally and you try and grow it in your garden, chances are you'll kill it. They are just almost completely impossible to grow in cultivation, unfortunately. And the Peony californica is very, very restricted location and probably pretty vulnerable. So the 3 sections are that the impossible to grow Western North American species, and then there's the Mouton section, which are the so-called tree peonies. I have heard in recent years that the Peony Society is really trying to get all of us who grew up learning tree peonies to stop calling them tree peonies, because they're not trees. Call them woody peonies. But most people know them as tree peonies, but they have woody stems, and they do form shrubs. They don't form trees. Generally, when we think about that, we call them, like if you were to ask me what's a tree peony, the species, I would say Peonia suffruticosa.
Yeah.
Which is really not a true species. It's a hybrid swarm of species. So some of our peonies are not in flower. I've got some actual things. I prefer to do this with actual flowers, but we don't have all of them here. So one of the main tree peonies, true species that we see in cultivation is Peonia ostii. This is one Feng Dan Bai that we call Phoenix White. That's one of those things, dates from the days when we couldn't stand having actual, non-English names on things. So I put a Phoenix White on there. But really beautiful plant. Woody peonies can be kind of open, big plants, but they have huge flowers on them. I mean, the flowers can be 7 inches across. Phoenix White is one of the real popular ones you see there. Another one, sometimes this is listed as Peonia suffruticosa, and then the cultivar Joseph Rock, but it's Peony rockii, and it typically is this white with those purple spots down by the throat. And you can see that's as opposed to the pure white or palest pink of Feng Dan Bai. There are some other woody species out there. There are several species that I've never seen anywhere in any collection. Presumably there's some places, but mostly in the wild in Asia. Most of these are Asian. But these suffruticosa hybrids are really pretty beautiful things if they're grown well. Shimadaijin here with those single pink flowers, Shimadaijin, and you can see in that Shimadaijin that this one will have flowers that are variegated. Nishiki means brocade. It's often applied in Japan to these plants that have variegated foliage or variegated flowers. But you can see behind that on the same plant, there's a flower with a solid kind of rose red color, and you'll get both of those on the same plant. And Seohini, again, that's just these beautiful woody peony flowers. They're pretty easy plants to grow. The problem is they're very expensive, and we'll talk about that a little bit, about why they're so expensive and why they can be a little bit harder to come by. Now, there are some other species that you see sometimes, not so much on the East Coast, more on the West Coast, but I don't see any reason why we can't grow some of these. I really think we should be able to. So Peonia delavei can range from yellow to kind of this red, as I understand the species. And then Ludlowii is a yellow one. And you can see here probably in this picture that the picture of the whole plant, it is probably 8 or 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide. I'm not sure if that's just one plant or if there's a couple in there, but then the flowers on it, just like in Delaveyi, are very small, which is why these haven't been used a great deal. Although when we get into some of the intersectional hybrids, this is where some of the yellow comes from in many of those intersectional hybrids. There was something that I learned as Peonia lutea or Peonia ludlowii variety lutea that had a much deeper yellow flower, still small, but now they say that's not a valid taxon. Sometimes they call it the lutea hybrids. I don't know exactly what all the taxonomy is behind some of these things, but they're beautiful flowers. I have germinated a lot of these from seed, and I've planted out a lot of them. I haven't had a lot of success, but looking at where they grow naturally, it doesn't seem like it should be our heat, and it certainly isn't our cold. So I'm still working on them. So other species. Now, I mentioned falling in love with these not too terribly long ago, and it's really the species Peonies is what I fallen in love with. We had, actually, it was at Raulston Blooms, our big plant sale and garden festival, maybe 7 years ago.
Okay.
I had just moved into a new house, had ripped out everything, was planting, had sun for the first time in my life. And one of our vendors, Pine Knot Farms, had a friend of theirs from Pennsylvania come down who was selling species peonies. And what he was selling, there were these little, like, 1.5 inch, I don't even think they were 2-inch little pots.
Sure.
Filled with gritty little media, and this one delicate little leaf coming up. And that was it. And they were so expensive.
You're describing John Lonsdale, aren't you?
I am describing John Lonsdale. And I bought more than a few of these things.
That's fair enough.
And I planted them. I don't grow stuff in pots. I planted them. And they have been amazing.
No doubt.
They have been absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I may have lost 1 out of 6 or 7 of those.
Sure.
$50 to $75 investments.
You look at the price tag on John's plants and you're like, there's no way, but then they are worth it.
It is, they were just such little tiny tender looking things. And now they are, 3-4 feet across. One of them, one of the Doricas, this is Peony Dorica, Peonia Dorica, the pale flowered one, which I'll show a flower in just a second, had last year, I counted, it had over 85 flowers on it.
Oh my gosh.
It's just amazing in 7 years.
No kidding.
Very similar, Peonia peregrina, a little bit lacier foliage. I really like the foliage on Dorica and the closely related forms. There's Caucasica, which I think is now Dorica subspecies Coriifolium. But when it comes up, it's beautiful. And then it goes almost blue-green without these real serrations in it. I'm told this grows here.
Okay.
I know people who grow tenuifolia. It is really, in terms of things that I know will do, it's kind of my white whale. I have not been able to be successful with it.
Okay.
But it's got this ferny foliage, and there's some great cultivars. Most of them red flowered. There is a very elusive white flowered one and an even more elusive old one called Flora plena, which is a double flowered red.
Nice. Which
people love. I have to admit, I like the idea of getting that because it's very hard to track down and get.
Sure.
But I love the single flowered peonies. And that's why I like the species. I won't say the simplicity of it because I think you look at that flower, those gold stamens, and that I think is gorgeous.
And then the foliar texture on top of that, like that's a wild plant right there.
It is so cool. It's going to happen. I'm going to get it. This one, Peony officinalis, is one of the most widespread European ones. We tend to think of things like peonies and lump them in with all these Asian plants. And that is because peonies have been so important in Asian culture. The Japanese call the woody peonies, Peony suffruticosa, they call the king of flowers. It's not the symbol flower of China because they don't have kind of a national thing, but it was voted on by the population to be the national flower of China. But then the Chinese government never managed to push through a vote or some crazy thing like that. But it's very important all over there. They have a lot of meanings to them. But there's also all these ones in Europe and Greece and the Balearic Islands and Macedonia. And the actual around Macedonia, there's an ancient civilization called Paeonia. That's where it gets its name from. Kind of the somewhere around Macedonia. They don't really know the borders. It's way back there. So that's where it actually gets that genus name. So the woody peonies to the Japanese were the king of the flowers. So lactiflora, this is where most of our garden herbaceous peonies come from, are derived from this. And can you guess what the Japanese call this?
I can't, no.
Well, you might think queen of flowers.
Okay.
But no, it is the prime minister of flowers.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
And I have to say, this picture is from our plants here at the Arboretum, which are usually flowering the last weekend in April, first weekend in May. That's usually when they're in full flower. And these are just some unidentified, fairly close to the species. They may have a few more petals than you would see wild lactiflora, but I think these are some of the most spectacular plants in the garden when they're in flower. I just love them, and I've grown out some seed from these, and this year I'm going to have one of my plants from this is going to have 2 flowers on it. So another couple of years and it'll look like this. But when you start talking about the lactiflora hybrids, this is where the bulk of the 7,000 to 8,000 peony selections, named peony selections, come from lactiflora. And there's just a kind of a smattering of some of the single flowered ones, which I really like. Years ago, a fantastic professor down in Alabama, whose name just slipped out of my head. Oh, I hate that. It'll come to me by the end. He did a whole study looking at the best peonies, herbaceous peonies for the South, the ones that would last the longest. And the very top of his list is the old cultivar, crinkled white, which opens big and white, has kind of ruffled edges. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Now everybody wants, super ultra doubled and crazy colors. But I mean, in terms of great garden plant, crinkled white is as good as you can get. And these peonies are tough. These are plants that you find growing in old cemeteries. You look for, down here in the South, look for daffodils and peonies. And you can see where an old homestead was. You go a little farther north and you might have lilacs thrown in there as well. Soil gets turned over or something, all of a sudden these peonies pop back up. They're actually difficult to kill for something that looks so nice. And then there are the semi-doubles. This coral sunset is just, it's so good. I mean, look at this. It opens up, it starts almost dark, coral, dark coral.
Right.
And then it gets lighter and lighter and lighter till it gets to pale yellow, and then all the petals will fall after that. But you get, this whole show of color on the plant.
Yeah, because the flowers, they open in succession. So while one's yellow, others will be bright red, and you get every single color in between on the way there.
Exactly. And this one wasn't blooming today. I pulled a flower off another one that's very similar to this. It's coral and gold. That gets a little more yellows in there. But yeah, it's, and you can see, if you look at this picture, you can see where the petals have already fallen, and you can just see kind of seed heads forming, and then buds that are just starting to show color, and buds that aren't even showing color. So you're right, this has been flowering in succession for quite a while. So, when people say, they go over fast, it's, not necessarily the case. But some more kind of double type things, and you can see where you get into almost lavender and things, and then the more true doubles. And some of these true doubles will last longer. All the little reproductive parts are been converted into petaloids, and so they don't get pollinated, so they don't try and form seed, and the flower is just there so that can get pollinated and form seed. And you do see bees and other things flying through there, but also ants. Ants love going in and pollinating the flowers. I had flowers next to me in my office, and they will probably, I probably have ants in my office now. And then there's some funky things, and if I'm not going to get the super simple ones, then I like the funky things. This one kind of opens up and looks pretty normal, but then those red staminodes, whatever they are, and one of my favorites, is Bowl of Beauty. I really like that.
Yeah.
I just think that's just so cool.
No kidding.
And of course, I had to put these in here. This is from last spring, early summer when I was in Japan. I paid more money than I should have for these variegated peony, lactiflora peonies for myself. I wasn't going to spend the Arboretum's money on those. They're all up and growing. One of them is showing variegation a little bit.
Okay. Well, that's something.
But very cool. And now the last group, as part of these herbaceous peonies, are the woodland ones. And a lot of peonies will grow kind of meadows. You know, some of the southern European ones grow in these hot, rocky, dry spaces, but a lot of them will grow in kind of meadows and woodland edges. And so in meadows, they get all that sun. They're early in the season, they flower, and then they can get some shade, a little bit of shade later in the season. And for us in the South, if you get a little afternoon shade, especially as you get into summer, it's much better. But the obovata and japonica, we used to think of them as two separate species. The japonica has been moved into obovata, and there are white forms and pink forms of both. But this is a picture of a plant I took in the wild on one side of the screen. Unfortunately, that's with a telephoto lens, because it was up on almost like looked like it was the entrance to a little cave and a cliff. And so we couldn't get up to it, but boy, it was in full fruit. And there's the flowers and the fruit, a close-up of the fruit and cultivation. And so it's really quite showy when it goes into fruit. And some of these peonies are like that, especially the species peonies, which tend to form good fruit. But really even, beyond that, a lot of them do that. Man, again, in Japan, I went over this time having skipped buying these woodland peonies, variegated woodland peonies, multiple times. I said, every time I was like, oh God, they're too expensive. And this time I was like, I'm buying some. I didn't buy any of these because these were all way out of my price range. And my price range has grown since I first went to Japan 20 years ago. They were still out of my price range. But
Jeez.
They're amazing. So that brings us to kind of the newest group and craze in peony world, and that are the intersectional hybrids, or the Ito hybrids, named for somebody who was the first person to actually make this cross between the tree peonies and the herbaceous peonies, the woody peonies and the herbaceous peonies. And what you got were plants that kind of straddled the border. When you grow these things, they get the huge flowers like the woody peonies. They grow as kind of dense, low plants like the herbaceous peonies, rather than getting kind of upright and having taller stems, but they're kind of semi-woody. But you cut them back at the end of the season. When they start looking bad, you cut them back hard down to the base, and you get new buds at the base. And these things are amazing. They are such easy, tough growers. They flower so heavily. It's hard to imagine. And this is the OG, the Bartzella here. don't know. I know I've learned what the name comes from, but I never can remember, and I feel better not knowing the actual reason behind it, because something about that name Bartzella just sounds so weird to me. But it's kind of these lemon yellow flowers. And this is another one where I've seen 50, 60 plus flowers on a plant at the same time, and they open in succession. I mean, it really is just a flower. But there's a lot more, and there's more coming out all the time. Here are a couple of them. I think we had or have these in our plant sale.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, and again, I didn't look at the breeder of this, but whoever Smith is, I'm sure he named his first one Smith Opus.
Sure enough.
Or Opus 1.
Yeah.
Probably Opus. It's like the first battle of Bull Run.
Sure.
It wasn't called the first battle of Bull Run after the first battle. It wasn't until they had a second battle that they called it that.
Yeah.
But now, Smith Opus 14, Smith Opus 17, I think he's getting away from what Opus actually means. When
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, Smith Opus, that's just one word right there. You could read it as Smithopus, like octopus.
Smithopus. I like that.
I think it's just as good as anything else.
I agree. But they're really cool plants. Let me stop share. We'll talk about real plants. So let's talk about some of those. I started with the species Peonies. This is one. I took these cuttings out of my garden this morning. And you can see they were holding up really well until I put them out here in full sunshine. Now, I mentioned the Peony doricas. This is the one that's called, sometimes called Molly the Witch. Have you ever heard that?
I've not, no.
Okay, so this is Peonia dorica, subspecies Lactosevicii.
There it is.
Lactosevicii.
It's like you were practicing that beforehand, right?
Yeah. And it has these creamy, they can be even more yellow than this, but creamy yellow flowers. And I think the yellow is more intense in colder areas. I think it's less genetic than it's often given credit for, because every time I see it in the South, it's this kind of creamy yellow color. And when I see it in a cooler climate, England or Pacific Northwest, it tends to have a little more yellow in it. But I love it. I love the foliage on it. When it comes out red. Then it has these really blue backs to it. Just really striking. Now, these actually, seed pods come from two other Dorica. So this is Dorica subspecies Mloscovicii. This one comes from straight Peonia dorica, and this is Dorica variety Coriifolium, Coriifolium. And these two look almost identical, except with pink flowers, deep pink flowers, except for this one completely finishes flowering before this one starts. And they're growing about 6 feet away from each other in my home garden. And this one almost always just has these 2 seed capsules, whereas this one usually has 4. Now, no treatment I've seen says that that's a distinguishing feature between the two, but it's what I always see. So these just started, these just flowered, finished up. This one still has a few flowers, but already, if I open up the seed pod, you'll see these bright red fruit start forming in here. And what'll happen is, as these mature in age, get late in the summer, they will start splitting open on their own. The seeds in there, it'll be bright red. Some will stay bright red. Those are ones that didn't get fertilized. And then there'll be some black ones in there, or all the red ones, some will turn black. And those will be the ones that have got fertilized. And you can already see in here, some are bigger than others. Let's see. Yeah, you can see the unfertilized versus the fertilized ones. These have actually started seeding in my garden just around the main plant. They're not going long distances, but the ants will get there's kind of an oily coating on there when they ripen up, and ants go to get that. So not only do you get ants going in there and helping pollinate the plant, but ants actually moving the seed and planting it for you. So it's kind of cool. Look for some in future sales with one little tiny leaf that were dug from my garden and brought in. We've already got a couple planted at the garden that were seedlings at my garden. Okay, so we're growing a lot of peonies. Like I mentioned, we've got around 50 different peonies planted in the garden. We've got about another 30 or so types in the nursery that are either growing in the nursery or are seeds that need to be sown, have been sown, but haven't come up yet. So let's look at some other peonies. So I'll start with one that's just a bud. This is that lactiflora, the species that I said was so beautiful. This is about as far along as it is. It just has buds that are just starting to open up. But I know in 2 weeks, it will be open. Some of these peonies are very dependent on temperatures, but some of them, like this lactiflora, is real steady with the time of year. So it'll be a little earlier. If it gets real warm early, it'll be not much later than the first weekend in May. But always like that. And I actually like it when you start getting these buds sitting up above this perfect dome of foliage that are starting to show color. And then you get to watch them kind of slowly do their thing. And again, this one, you can see how dark it is in here. It'll open up, it'll be pink, it'll get paler and paler and paler until finally it's white. So let's see, what else do we have in here? This is one that I showed a picture of. This is Nice Gal. So kind of the almost purpley foliage color. But you can also see, this is something that breeders breed for more or less, is some of these petals you can see have, it's like somebody went through and snipped them with scissors a little bit. So these bigger petals don't have any of that, but that's a characteristic that breeders select for, to have more or less of that kind of thing. All right, let's see if I can remember what all I got here. This is, along with crinkled white, this is perhaps one of the most widely grown and best peonies for the South. This is Scarlet O'Hara, and it's a pretty good red, especially when it's younger. Almost all the peonies start darker and lighten up as they mature, the flowers mature. But another single really good one for the South, Scarlet O'Hara. I don't know that you can get a whole lot prettier than that. Let's see, what else do we have? All right, here's another one that I like. This is kind of like Bowl of Beauty that I had shown, but this is one called Do Tell. And this is, you can see where instead of having all those gold stamens in there, like we have on Scarlet O'Hara and species, all of these stamens have been turned into variously petaloids or staminodes. I guess you would call these probably closer to petaloids. Although there are a few pollen-producing stamens still tucked in about there. So, but there's much less likely this is going to get pollinated by itself in your garden. Pale pink, that white in the center. I really like that. If you were early on the call, we had good view of this nice double one. This is Peony, and you can see again, this is a nice full double where they really went for that crinkled edges on all the petals. Even these outer petals have these little cuts and things through them. So Peony. This can have a little bit more pink to it early in the season or where it's cooler. All right, this one is Cytherea. That's Cytherea. And this is a nice, semi-double. I am actually personally not a big fan of the double ones. I like to see all the parts of the flower. I like, maybe I'm a voyeur, I don't know. I like the single flowers, but this is a nice in-between. And I think really pretty. I kind of like, when you look at it from the side, it's like a water lily.
I was thinking the exact same thing, literally. That's really beautiful.
I was thinking that because I was looking at it as I was showing it.
right. Yeah.
It looks just like a water lily.
No kidding. Yeah.
But I think that's really a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
All right. 2 more, and then I'll talk a little bit about culture and answer some questions. Okay, this is like that coral sunset. This is coral and gold. And I was really tempted to cut about 3 or 4 different flowers on there off of this one, and decided not to because I wanted people to enjoy it in the garden. But at whatever stage you're seeing this in, it is a different color. It comes out really nice, beautiful, almost orange coral, and then it goes to more pink and finally kind of yellow and cream. And it does it within a flower. I don't know how well this will show up, but it's real pale inside and the outside is much darker still. So it just goes through just this succession of color, and it's all on the plant at one time. And let's see, we'll end with a big old honking flower. Yeah. Now, this is one of those Ito hybrids. This is one of those things that's halfway between a woody peony and halfway between a herbaceous peony. This is one called Hillary. And again, just these huge flowers, really full. I don't know what you'd call this. It isn't quite fully double, but it's more than semi-double. So we have 3/4 double. But again, this one, not only does the color change kind of as the flower opens and matures, it seems to change during the time of day. You go out at one point of day and the way the light hits it, you get so many more yellows and oranges in a flower that's this open. You go out during a different time of day and it's almost lavender colored. It's really, it really just kind of goes through this whole range of color. I could never explain to you what color flower this is.
I'll echo that sentiment. There's the coral one out by the yurt. I walk by that once in the morning and once in the afternoon. While I'm explaining this in the recording, I'll have the pictures pop up. But there was one morning where it started out pretty tight, and then by the afternoon, all the way open. Like, peonies are very dynamic throughout a single day even. So they really do invite you to come out and see what they're doing constantly.
Well, perfect segue, because what I was going to follow this up with, while they open, like something I cut this morning, sitting in my office and sitting out here in the sun especially, had really moved on from where it was. But peonies make fantastic cut flowers. Yeah. You can cut them, bring them inside. Don't set them in a sunny window. Sunny window, petals are going to be falling almost immediately. But you put them in a if your house is, livably cool in it in our age of air conditioning, and you don't put it right in the sun, you can cut them and they will last for ages. They really will. If you cut them before they're completely open, it's when you get the most bang for your buck. You could, but I wouldn't cut them as early as, where'd he go? Oh, down here. I wouldn't cut them quite this early, although you can, but I would wait till it was a little bit more open, and they will just last and last. And in fact, North Carolina, down towards the coast really, east of here, there was a big contingent of Dutch settlers here, and one of the things they did cut peonies for the cut flower trade here in North Carolina. So, not necessarily what we always think of when we think of them. So, peonies, cultivation. Let's talk about growing peonies. Start with getting peonies. You can get peonies potted and growing as plants. You've seen that even more now with the Ito peonies. And that's fine. You just treat those like any other plant. You take them, go home, you plant them. Often, traditionally, but also mail order, you get peonies bare root. They no tops, no soil, just the roots. And there's two things to be careful of. One, make sure if you go to plant them, you got them right side up. And I say that as a joke,
Sure,
a little bit, except for I have known nurseries to put them in pots upside down, and they will not survive. If you get a peony, and they can be a little bit hard to tell where the eyes are, because they have these thick roots, which look a little more like stems than kind of top. And it can be confusing sometimes. Once you know it, it's easy.
Yeah.
If you're not sure, you can go online and look at pictures and things and figure it out. Or pre-internet, my advice was plant it on its side. If you're not sure which is top, plant it on its side and it'll usually figure it out. Now, there's two different ways. When you have the woody peonies, you've shelled out some big bucks, you've mail ordered some woody peonies. Those come almost always, if you're getting a named variety, they are grafted on the crown of a herbaceous peony instead of the eye of the herbaceous peony. Now, it shouldn't throw up any herbaceous peony stalks or anything like that, but you get that grafted. So just assume if you get a named woody peony that it is grafted on a herbaceous peony. Best thing you can do with that is plant it relatively deep, 4 to 6 inches deep. And what will happen then is it encourages more shoots to come up. Because otherwise, if you plant it too shallow, you'll only have that 1 or 2 stems. You'll just never really bunch up. But also, it will generally, the woody peony will send out roots itself, and so it'll establish better. It won't just rely on that herbaceous peony. So you plant those 4 to 6 inches deep, ideally in some, in good soil. Now again, they come with these very fleshy roots. And often, they'll be this wide. What you want to do is you want to make sure you're digging a hole wider than the roots. We say that for every plant, but I know some of y'all are like me. Sometimes those roots are a little bit wider than you thought, and you kind of cram them in the hole. Don't do that, because if you've kind of crammed them in, sometimes they'll kind of pop themselves up a little bit, and then you've got that crown coming up. Now, herbaceous peonies. Much of what you read about planting herbaceous peonies has to do with them being such a beloved plant up in the frigid Arctic zones. I mean, Peony lactiflora can tolerate, some reports say, negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh my goodness.
Which, who cares? I'm not going to be there. But so they're often recommended to plant them 2+ inches deep and lots of mulch. That is because if you live in an area where the ground freezes and thaws, you get that frost heaving that pops up. We don't have that problem. I'd recommend you want to plant your herbaceous peonies shallow. You would do much better with too shallow than too deep. I'd say if you're unsure, do them 1 inch deep. I actually like to plant them even less than that, 1/2 inch deep over the crown, really basically at the top of the soil, and then I mulch completely over them. So those are the recommendations. Let me go back to those woody peonies real quick. Often if you get them bare root, the tops, the woody part has been completely cut. So you are planting this whole thing 4 to 6 inches deep, and there's nothing there when you're done. There's nothing sticking out of the soil at all. So be careful about that. They can be very slow to establish. Other than the obovata / japonica types, they really want sun, relatively rich, but well-drained soil. You're much better off having your peonies too dry than too wet. They grow typically in rockier areas, sandier, grittier, gravelier soils. They tolerate our normal garden soils just fine, but they don't like to stay wet. You start getting fungal problems on them. Here in the southeast, as they're growing, after they flower and you get into later summer, sometimes you get leaf spots and they can start to look ugly. When they start really bothering me, I just cut them. Try to do it late enough that they don't do much resprouting of foliage. Sometimes they'll do a little bit, but they've got enough. They've got enough stored up in those big old fleshy roots to be fine. They may, especially the woody peonies, if you live in an area with very acid soils, which a lot of us here in the South do, you may want to throw some lime around it every now and then, especially the woody peonies. It does help them a bit, but I don't. To me, it's less about changing the pH and more about making some of the nutrients when it's coming into growth a little more readily available. Are there questions? Let me see if there are questions.
There are a handful of questions. Sue was asking about fertilizing the Ito peonies. She wants to know when and how do you do that, and then how much sun do the Itos need?
Okay, let's start with the sun. The more, the better. Full sun is going to be best. Most peonies will grow in a pretty fair amount of shade. They just won't flower as heavy. They'll be a little more loose and open. But actually, while I was putting this talk together, I was thinking I had bought 3 Bartzella peonies and had them in different places in my garden, and they get big. They get big.
Yeah, they do.
And I dug up one and chopped it up. We'll get back to propagation in a second. I chopped it into pieces and brought it in, and we potted them up and grew them out and sold them or gave them away or something. And I got another one I'm gonna dig up, and I'm thinking maybe I'll put it in my woodland and see how it does. But generally, the more sun, the better your plants are gonna be. Fertilizing them, I don't. We have, I have a lot of clay in my soil, so it's got a lot of nutrients there. You don't want to put too much nitrogen on there. If you're going to fertilize them, you're better off doing it with, say, a bulb fertilizer, because they are effectively geophytes with those really thick storage roots. Something, kind of a flower boosting type of thing. But again, that's pushing mostly the phosphorus and potassium, which we tend to have in abundance if you have clay in your soil. We don't generally need to add a whole lot more of that in the soil. Nitrogen, we sometimes do, but you don't. If you give excess nitrogen to peonies, too much nitrogen, you'll get foliage at the expense of flowers. You'll get this really lush growth that is real susceptible to fungal problems. I just would, now if you mulch with something organic, that gives you some, something in there. But if you're gonna fertilize, I'd fertilize very lightly.
Cool. That's good advice. Shira says that she has woody peony that has never bloomed. She has another one that has wonderful blooms on it, but she's wondering what should she do for the problem child.
So, couple solutions. One, I'm gonna start with the assumption that it's getting enough sun.
Okay.
I will say, go in and see how deep it is planted. Just pull some soil away from the trunk and see, because if they're planted way too deep, that can be a problem. Then I would look at, you can do a soil test, or it ain't gonna hurt it, just put down some limestone around it. Put a cup or two, kind of around the drip line of it. And see, it won't hurt anything if it doesn't really need it, but that may be what it needs. And I would do that in the fall, and maybe another cup in the spring if you really want to push it. That'll often do it. Now, if that doesn't do it, the 2 more drastic things you can do is, one, you can cut it back really hard, basically to the ground, to encourage it to throw out more shoots. And you won't flower that next year, but it should fly the year after. You can do that, or go through. Sometimes I just like to scare my plants. I go through with a spade, a long spade, and just like as if you're gonna dig it out, just go through there and cut all the roots off around it. And sometimes the plant thinks, "Oh my gosh, I'm being stressed, I'm dying, I gotta flower," and so it'll throw out flowers. And sometimes then after that, it's like gotten over the hump, and we'll do it. I know there's probably some better physiological reasoning behind that, but I'll anthropomorphize plants sometimes. I'm not above that.
No kidding. It's a useful tool for teaching sometimes,
Exactly.
Why not? Okay. So Marilyn has a question about when you're planting the grafted ones real deep. She's saying, do you mean 4 to 6 inches down to the top of the bare root or like to the bottom of it?
4 to 6 inches down to, say, the top of the crown.
Yeah.
So you want that down there. I'm going to go back with the herbaceous peonies and planting them shallow.
Yeah.
Here's the other piece for planting them shallow. The other reason for doing that is peonies need a certain amount of cold. Most of them, the lactifloras especially, need a certain amount of cold in order to form flowers the next year. So if you plant them too deep, the herbaceous ones, they can not get enough cooling over the winter if they're too well insulated, and so you don't get good flowering. You don't have to worry about that with the woody peonies because the flower buds are being formed up top, and the tops will get enough chilling. Unless you're south of, it gets really hard when you get south of Route 20 in Georgia. That's
okay.
A lot of people consider that kind of the big dividing line between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to peonies.
Okay.
Not to say you can't grow them farther south, but it starts getting trickier.
Well, speaking of growing peonies farther south, Andy says that he lives in Wilmington and he wants to know if there are any varieties that do better with their heat and humidity.
Yeah, one, Crinkled White and Scarlet O'Hara, two. Those are two great old ones. Some of the really old ones that are really ubiquitous are the best. There's a reason they've been hanging around.
No kidding.
Festiva Maxima is another one.
Yeah.
There are getting to be more and more lists with peony societies or nurseries that are growing them that are, best heat tolerant peonies. I wish I could find that professor at
the one whose name you'll surely remember.
Oh my gosh, I can picture him.
Okay, can you do us a little stick figure sketch? That'll work.
He's retired now. I wish I could find his research. I still remember a talk he gave. It was fantastic on this. But yeah, I think with some digging, you can find some good ones. Or, if you're in Wilmington, we're pretty warm here. You come up here and see what's growing well for us. The Wilmington Botanic Garden there at the extension station. I don't know if they're growing peonies or not, but they might. I'd look into that.
For sure. Okie dokie. Jackie wants to know if peonies do well in containers or if they have to go into the ground.
Well, certainly a lot in Asia, they grow a lot of the woody peonies in containers. I think they'd be just fine in containers because, during the winter, the root system likes that cold.
One thing I will throw in about growing containers in Asia, they tend to use rock as a substrate.
Yes.
In America, we use peat, which holds a lot of water, where in Asia, they use straight rock. At the bonsai nursery I studied at, we were seriously growing in 1/4-inch gravel and 1/4-inch gravel only. The issue with that is you got to keep that thing watered because that is some serious drainage. And that might be one of the reasons that they can do peonies well in containers, because they're growing it in straight rock and they're willing to put forth the effort to keep that watered even in the heat of the summer.
Exactly. And I was going down a road, down kind of that same road. And I was going to say, the one thing that you'll need to keep in mind with your peonies is if you use a bagged potting soil, which I would probably not recommend.
Sure.
But even like what I use is a potting mix, like a nursery potting mix, which is really just pine bark, which has good drainage, and a peony would grow just fine in that. That's what they're growing them at the nursery when you go home and buy it. But it is that maybe 2 years with that, because it's organic and it breaks down. And that's the same thing, even if you get a pretty loose bagged potting mix, it's organic and it will break down. So by Year 2, usually. Year 3, for sure, it will have compacted, it'll sunk down, and it just holds moisture. It doesn't have air in there. It really, and peonies like air in the soil. So they don't love super heavy soils. Now I grow in, a clay-based soil, and that's fine, but I have enough organic matter to keep it going, and woodland conditions, they do, the more shade tolerant ones do just fine.
Okay, we do have one final question, and it just so happens to be about woodland peonies and their sun requirements. Marilyn wants to know how little sun, hours per day, do the woodland peonies need to flower well, particularly compared to others such as Bartzella?
How much do the woodland peonies need?
Yeah.
If they're in a woodland with, high shade, pines and deciduous trees, and there's dappled light coming through there, that's fine. They're literally woodland plants.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I plant them in the same places I plant my ferns and my rhododendron and hosta, and I actually have hosta this year. Deer have not eaten my hosta.
That's exciting.
But any of my woodland plants, I plant there with them.
Cool. Yeah, and obviously the more sun you can give them, the better. But I mean, just give them a try. You never know how well they might do for you.
The woodland ones want some shit. They don't want to be out in the full blazing sun. They really want to be a bit cooler. The obovata and japonica types.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Mark, for pulling together all these peonies and teaching us all this stuff.
I love it. And you can come out anytime between, say, late March, early April, and mid-May at least, but later than that, really, with some of the Ito peonies, and see quite a few peonies in flower on any given day out here at the Arboretum. So
no kidding.
Come on out.
It's always special. It's always different every single time you come. So definitely plan to make some trips out this way. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Midweek program today. We will be back again next week. Mark and Greg will be talking about dogwoods. So that should be lots of fun. We will see y'all then. Y'all take care.